"Are you still too sick to help out with my kids?" my sister asked mockingly when I refused to babysit. She even accused me of abusing them. Now she lost everything. I'm 34. At the time, I was trying to pick up the pieces after a tough year. My chronic condition had started taking over my life. One day I felt fine, and the next, I couldn't even get out of bed. The doctors said I needed to slow down, but slowing down is hard when you've been the one everyone leans on. When I had a regular job, I was always running errands, picking up slack for everyone, and of course, taking care of my family. I was the go-to person, the one who could handle it all. But now, it was a different story. Every day I felt more drained. Every task seemed like a mountain. Some mornings, just the act of showering would leave me breathless and needing to rest, but nobody could see that struggle. Nobody wanted to. Rebecca, my sister-in-law, has always been a bit much. I'll be the first to admit it. But at first, I didn't mind. When I lost my job, it felt like I had so much time on my hands, so I started babysitting her 2 kids, Maya and Ben. They were adorable, and I felt this sense of purpose helping out with them. Maya was 6 then, with these bright, curious eyes and endless questions about everything. Ben was only 3, a mischievous little ball of energy who loved dinosaurs and building block towers only to knock them down with dramatic sound effects. That's when Rebecca asked if I could start babysitting more often. I hesitated at first. I had just been diagnosed, and I knew pushing myself too hard could make my condition worse. But the thing is, Maya and Ben were sweet, and I genuinely enjoyed being with them. Plus, Rebecca kept saying how much she needed help. It felt good to be needed, especially when I was feeling so worthless myself. At first, it felt like a small favor, a temporary thing, but slowly it became the norm. Every week, I was watching her kids for hours. And as the weeks turned into months, I started to realize it wasn't just a favor anymore, it was an obligation. Rebecca started to rely on me more and more. I didn't know how to say no without feeling guilty. The requests became more frequent and more demanding. What started as "could you watch them Tuesday afternoon" turned into "I need you Monday through Thursday this week," with barely any notice. When I tried to decline, even politely, Rebecca had a way of making me feel like I was letting down not just her, but those innocent children. "Oh," she'd sigh deeply, her voice deflating with disappointment. "I guess I'll have to cancel my important meeting then. Maya will be so upset. She's been talking all week about making those cookies with you." Or she'd put Maya on the phone, coaching her to say, "Auntie, aren't you coming over? You promised we could finish our puzzle," even when I'd made no such promise. Then came the breaking point. One day, my doctor told me I had to drastically reduce my stress levels. No more overdoing it, no more pushing through. That's when I had to face the reality. I couldn't keep going like this. I needed to take care of myself before I fell apart completely. So I told Rebecca that I needed to stop babysitting so often. I explained that my health was deteriorating and I just couldn't keep pushing myself anymore. What happened next caught me completely off guard. Rebecca, instead of understanding, snapped. "What do you even do all day?" she said, practically throwing the words at me like daggers. "You're just sitting around being lazy, aren't you?" It was like a slap in the face. I couldn't even process the words. I tried to stay calm, but the frustration bubbled up inside me. I wanted to yell at her, tell her how much pain I was in, how I could barely get out of bed some days, but I stayed quiet. It wasn't worth it, not with her. Rebecca went on, saying how watching her kids was no big deal and that I was just being selfish for not helping out. That was it for me. I didn't have the energy to argue anymore, so I just stopped responding. I figured maybe if I ignored her, she'd get the message and move on. But of course, she didn't. It was like every few days I'd get another text. "When are you going to start babysitting again?" Or worse, "Maya and Ben really miss you." She played on my emotions, used the kids like pawns in some twisted game. She'd send photos of Maya holding up drawings she'd made for me, stick figures of us holding hands with "I miss you" scrawled in wobbly letters. One night she FaceTimed me right at bedtime, and there was Ben in his pajamas, clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur, his eyes wide and sad. "Ben wanted to say good night to you," Rebecca said, her voice syrupy sweet. "He's been asking for you all day." It was Rebecca's calculated move, another emotional tug at my heartstrings. She knew exactly what she was doing, weaponizing her children's innocence against my resolve to prioritize my health. I tried to stay firm, tried to remind myself that I needed to focus on my health, but guilt kept creeping in. Maya and Ben, I missed them too. I started to wonder, was I really just being dramatic about my health? Maybe I could still help out a little. But then I'd remember how my body felt when I overdid it, and that would remind me why I needed to put myself first. The manipulation got more sophisticated. Rebecca started sharing stories with our mutual friends and family about how abandoned she felt, how she was struggling so much without my help. She'd sigh dramatically at family gatherings when someone asked how she was managing. "It's so hard now that Lena can't help anymore," she'd say, casting a glance my way. "The kids ask about her every day, but what can you do? Some people just have different priorities." She even started bringing the kids to our in-laws' house when she knew I'd be there, coaching them to run to me with excited hugs and pleas of, "When are you coming over?" It was emotionally manipulative in the most painful way, using the genuine affection of children as a tool to make me comply with her demands. Things started to go downhill fast. After a few weeks of this emotional tug-of-war, I started to feel the pressure. Every text from Rebecca felt like a weight pressing down on me. Maya and Ben's faces kept haunting me. How could I say no to them? They were just kids. But at the same time, I couldn't keep sacrificing my own health just to make Rebecca happy. One particularly low day, when my pain was so intense I could barely move, she texted me a video of Ben crying, saying he wanted to see me. I later found out from my husband David, Rebecca's brother, that Ben had actually been crying over a broken toy, and Rebecca had seized the opportunity to record him and twist the narrative. When David confronted her about it, she shrugged it off as just trying to remind Lena how much the kids love her. Then it happened. We were at a family dinner at my in-laws' house. I hadn't seen Rebecca in person since that last fight, and I was dreading it, but it was family and I didn't want to cause a scene, so I went. The moment we sat down at the table, I could feel the tension in the air. It was thick, suffocating. I could see Rebecca sitting across from me, a smug little smile on her face like she was waiting for the right moment to strike. And then she did. "So, Lena," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "are you still too sick to help out with my kids? Or is that just an excuse so you can lay around all day?" I froze. The room went completely silent. I could feel the heat rise in my face and my heart was pounding in my chest. The embarrassment, the anger, it all hit me at once. I had no idea what to say. I tried to keep my cool, but it was impossible. I finally managed to say, "I've explained my health condition to you, Rebecca. This isn't an excuse. I need to take care of myself." But she didn't stop. Instead, she smirked and said, "Maybe babysitting would do you some good, get you off your pity train." The laughter from the table was uncomfortable, and I could feel my hands trembling under the table. I wanted to say so much more, to tell her how selfish she was being, how she couldn't even begin to understand what I was going through, but I bit my tongue. I didn't want to cause a scene. Thankfully, David stepped in before I could say anything else. He defended me, told Rebecca to stop being so disrespectful, but the damage had already been done. I was humiliated. Update 1. A few days later, it got even worse. I was at home, trying to unwind after a long day, when there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was caught off guard to see a police officer standing there. "Are you Lena?" he asked. My stomach dropped. I had no idea what was happening. The officer was tall with a serious expression that made my heart race immediately. Next to him stood a woman in plain clothes who introduced herself as a social worker from Child Protective Services. He explained that Rebecca had filed a police report accusing me of child abuse, saying I'd hurt Maya and Ben while babysitting. The words hit me like a physical blow. The social worker watched my reaction carefully as the officer continued, explaining that Rebecca claimed she noticed bruising on Ben's arms after he'd spent time with me 2 weeks ago. According to her statement, Maya had finally broken down and told her that I had grabbed Ben too hard when he wouldn't stop crying. I immediately denied the accusations, my voice barely above a whisper. I hadn't even been alone with the children for over a month. How could Rebecca go this far? What kind of person fabricates abuse allegations as revenge for setting boundaries? The social worker asked if I would be willing to answer some questions, her tone professional but not unkind. I agreed immediately, desperate to clear my name from these horrific accusations. For the next hour, they questioned me about my relationship with the children, my health condition, and the recent conflict with Rebecca. I answered everything truthfully, showing them text messages documenting when I had last watched the children and the increasingly hostile exchanges with Rebecca afterward. When asked why Rebecca might make these allegations, I explained about my chronic condition worsening and Rebecca's anger when I could no longer babysit. I showed them messages where Rebecca had tried to manipulate me using the children, including one particularly telling exchange where she'd writ, "You'll regret choosing your so-called health problems over my kids." It wasn't an explicit threat, but in light of the current situation, its implication was clear. As they prepared to leave, the social worker handed me her card. She explained that while they take all allegations seriously, they also recognize that false reports sometimes happen, especially during family conflicts. Her eyes held mine for a moment as she assured me they would be investigating thoroughly. I sat in stunned silence after they left, the reality of what had just happened slowly sinking in. Rebecca had crossed a line I never imagined she would. This wasn't just manipulation anymore, this was an attempt to destroy my reputation, my relationships, possibly even my freedom. Child abuse allegations, even when proven false, could follow a person forever. I was in shock. I immediately called Rebecca. When she answered, I demanded to know what was going on and why she would accuse me of something so terrible. Her response was chilling. She didn't even try to hide her anger, spitting that I couldn't just ditch her kids and get away with it. She suggested this would teach me not to mess with her. I tried reasoning with her, explaining the seriousness of filing false police reports about child abuse. My voice trembled with both fear and rage as I attempted to make her understand the gravity of what she'd done. Rebecca's response was dismissive. She scoffed, telling me to stop being dramatic. In her mind, they wouldn't actually do anything. She just wanted to scare me a little to make me understand that I couldn't abandon them when they needed me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. In Rebecca's twisted mind, this was just another manipulation tactic, not a potentially life-destroying false accusation. When I informed her that the authorities were taking this seriously and that she could face legal consequences for filing a false report, there was a moment of silence. Then she laughed, actually laughed. She insisted nobody was going to jail and told me to stop being dramatic, that this was between us. I was shaking, my mind racing. I didn't even know how to respond. The accusation was insane, but she was too proud and too petty to back down. I hung up, unable to continue the conversation, and immediately called David. He needed to know what his sister had done. David was in the middle of a business meeting when I called, but he stepped out as soon as he heard the tremor in my voice. When I told him about the police visit and Rebecca's accusation, he fell silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he said he was coming home. He instructed me not to talk to Rebecca again, not to talk to anyone. We needed a lawyer. While waiting for David to arrive, I began methodically gathering evidence. I printed out all my text exchanges with Rebecca, medical records documenting my condition, and receipts showing where I'd been on the days Rebecca claimed I was with the children. I even found old photos on my phone of Maya and Ben during our time together, happy, smiling, clearly comfortable and safe in my presence. The police officer listened to my side of the story, and thankfully they saw right through her lies. There was no evidence, no truth to what she was saying. I had an alibi, and the officer even checked the security footage from my house, which showed that I hadn't been anywhere near Rebecca's home when the alleged incident took place. The investigation moved quickly after that. The social worker interviewed Maya and Ben separately with a child psychologist present. Maya, too young to fully understand what was happening but old enough to know the truth from lies. According to the report we received later, she kept insisting, "Auntie Lena is nice. She reads me stories and makes good snacks." Ben, being younger, was less verbal but showed no fear or discomfort when shown my picture. The child psychologist noted that his behavior was inconsistent with that of a child who had experienced abuse at my hands. Most damning for Rebecca was when the doctor who examined the children found that the bruises she'd photographed as evidence were actually washable marker stains that came off with a bit of scrubbing. The pediatrician, who had known the family for years, noted that Rebecca had been unusually insistent about documenting what were obviously not bruises. Rebecca's scheme had backfired spectacularly. The officer apologized to me, assured me everything was cleared up, but the emotional damage lingered. It was like I had been dragged through the mud for nothing. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Even knowing I was innocent, the mere association with such allegations felt contaminating. I kept having nightmares about being arrested, about Maya and Ben being afraid of me, about losing everything over Rebecca's vindictive lies. David suggested I file charges against Rebecca for making a false report, but I hesitated. While part of me wanted her to face consequences for what she'd done, I worried about how a legal battle would affect Maya and Ben. They were innocent in all this, and they'd already been used as pawns enough. And that's when Mark found out. He was furious. I had never seen him so angry. Mark was Rebecca's husband, a quiet, reserved man who generally stayed out of conflicts, preferring to let Rebecca handle family matters. He worked long hours as an accountant and often seemed exhausted when I saw him, trailing behind Rebecca and the kids with a resigned expression. I'd always wondered what he really thought about his wife's behavior, but he'd never voiced any disagreement with her until now. From what I gathered, he wasn't happy with Rebecca for a while, but this false accusation was the last straw. Apparently, he'd been completely unaware of what Rebecca was doing until the police contacted him as part of their investigation. He was horrified to learn that she had not only filed a false report but had tried to coach Maya into supporting her story. He confronted her, demanded she apologize to me, but of course Rebecca refused. She was too proud and too embarrassed to admit she was wrong. Instead, she doubled down, insisting to Mark that she might have exaggerated a bit, but that I had indeed been too rough with the children. Mark didn't buy it for a second. David overheard an explosive phone call where Mark confronted Rebecca about what she'd done. He was outraged that she had tried to ruin her sister-in-law's life simply because I couldn't babysit anymore. Most disturbing to him was that she had used their children, attempting to make them lie about being hurt. He questioned what kind of person would do such a thing. Rebecca's response was apparently to burst into tears and claim she was just trying to protect her children, a performance that might have worked in the past but now fell on deaf ears. Mark had seen through her manipulation, and there was no going back. The next day, Mark showed up at our door. His face was drawn, his eyes red-rimmed from what looked like a sleepless night. "I'm so sorry," he said as soon as I opened the door. "I had no idea she would go this far. I knew she was upset about the babysitting, but this," he trailed off, shaking his head. "There's no excuse for it, none." I invited him in, and over coffee he confessed that things between him and Rebecca had been deteriorating for years. Her demanding nature, her manipulation, her refusal to take responsibility for anything, it had been wearing him down. But he'd stayed for the kids, that classic excuse that keeps so many unhappy marriages limping along. He drew the line at using the children the way she had. He explained that while Rebecca had done selfish things before, nothing compared to falsely accusing someone of abuse, especially someone who had done nothing but help them. When Mark came to apologize on her behalf, I felt a mix of emotions. I wasn't happy about being caught in the middle of their drama, but I did feel vindicated. Rebecca had tried to ruin my life, and now everything was falling apart for her. Mark explained that he'd moved out the night before, taking Maya and Ben to stay with his parents until he could figure out their next steps. He mentioned that the children were asking about me and missing me. He gently asked if it would be okay for them to visit sometime under his supervision. I hesitated, torn between my love for the children and my fear of getting pulled back into Rebecca's toxic orbit. But looking at Mark's sincere face, I realized that he was truly trying to do the right thing, both for his children and for me. I agreed, admitting that I missed them too. As Mark was leaving, he shared his belief that Rebecca wasn't well. He wasn't excusing her behavior, there was no excuse, but he felt there was something wrong with her, something he had been ignoring for too long. He expressed determination to make sure she got help, whether she wanted it or not. I nodded, not knowing what to say. Part of me still felt angry, still wanted Rebecca to suffer for what she'd put me through, but another part hoped that Mark was right, that Rebecca could get the help she needed. Update 2. In the weeks that followed, I learned that Rebecca was indeed seeking therapy, though whether by choice or as part of a legal agreement, I wasn't sure. Mark filed for divorce and primary custody of the children, using the false accusation incident as evidence of Rebecca's instability. It was a messy, painful process for everyone involved. David and I kept our distance, though we did allow Maya and Ben to visit occasionally when Mark brought them over. Those visits were bittersweet, joyful to see their innocent faces again, painful to know the circumstances that had led to our estrangement. Rebecca eventually sent a terse, formal apology letter, clearly written with legal guidance. It acknowledged that her accusations were unfounded and expressed regret for any inconvenience caused. It was hardly the heartfelt apology I deserved, but I hadn't expected even that much from her. The whole ordeal left me with complicated feelings. On one hand, I was relieved that the truth had prevailed and that Rebecca's manipulation had finally been exposed for what it was. On the other hand, I mourned the family relationships that had been damaged, possibly beyond repair. Most of all, I worried about Maya and Ben, caught in the crossfire of adult conflicts they couldn't possibly understand. But there was one unexpected silver lining. The experience had forced me to stand firm in my boundaries, to prioritize my health without guilt. Rebecca's extreme reaction had only confirmed what I'd suspected all along, that her demands were unreasonable, her expectations impossible to satisfy. In the end, her plan to punish me for setting boundaries had revealed more about her character than mine. And while I wouldn't have chosen this painful path to clarity, I was grateful for the lessons it had taught me, about standing my ground, about recognizing manipulation, and about the importance of protecting my well-being, even when others try to make me feel selfish for doing so.